Accounting for notes payable. How to account notes payable? First, i-define muna natin ang notes payable. Then, illustration kung paano i-record ang notes payable kapag issued for cash lump sum, issued for cash installment, note issued for property. Kapag note issued for property, pwedeng interest-bearing yung note at pwede rin namang non-interest-bearing. Kapag non-interest-bearing ang note, tatlo ang pwedeng maging method. Depende sa given illustration. Pwedeng straight line method, outstanding balance method, or effective interest method. Definition: notes payable is a written agreement promising to pay a certain amount on its maturity date. Notes payable are contracts between the maker and the creditor. Yun ang pinakasimpleng meaning ng notes payable. Isang promise contract na ginawa ni debtor or maker na nakalagay sa contract na yon na babayaran ni maker sa creditor pagdating ng due date, including interest. Just in case hindi mamit ang conditions, nakalagay din doon kung may grace period or allowances in case failure to meet prior conditions. Note issued for cash lump sum. Kapag note issued for cash lump sum, meaning babayaran yung note ng minsanan pagdating ng maturity date. Illustration: John borrowed money from the bank amounting to 500,000 pesos dated June 2022. The note is an interest-bearing note of 15% payable in 1 year lump sum. Tatlo ang magiging entry sa illustration na to. First, yung issuance ng note. Debit cash, 500,000 pesos. Credit notes payable, 500,000 pesos. Second, yung monthly accrual of interest. Debit interest expense, 6,250. And credit interest payable, 6,250. Paano nakuha ang 6,250? Nakuha ang 6,250 sa PRT or Principal times Rate times Time. Sa lahat ng notes payable ay may recognition of interest expense. Dito sa illustration, credit ang interest payable dahil lump sum yung payment, meaning minsanan sa maturity date babayaran ng principal and interest. Pero kahit na minsanan babayaran ng notes payable, magre-recognize pa rin ng monthly accrual interest para hindi bigla ang taas ang interest expense pagdating ng June 2023. At para in accordance na rin sa matching principal accounting, recognize expense when incurred. Pangatlong entry, payment of notes payable at maturity date. Debit notes payable yung buong notes, 500,000 pesos. Debit interest payable, lahat na nang na-accrue magmula nung umpisa. Ang total nun ay 75,000 pesos and credit cash, 575,000 pesos. Next, paano naman kapag installment yung note and same pa rin na issued for cash? Note issued for cash installment. Illustration: John borrowed money from the bank amounting to 500,000 pesos dated June 2022. The note is an interest-bearing note of 15% payable in 4 installment due on June 2023. Same illustration na dagdagan lang ng 4 installment. Same pa rin na mag-e-entry ng issuance of note na debit cash 500,000 pesos and credit notes payable 500,000 pesos. Pagdating sa recognition ng interest expense, dito sa illustration, sinabay na ang recognition of interest sa payment, kaya ang entry ay debit interest expense 18,750 pesos na nakuha sa PRT, principal times rate times time, or 500,000 pesos times 0.15 times 3/12. 18,750 pesos ang babayaran na interest sa first payment. Then another debit notes payable 125,000 pesos na nakuha naman sa 500,000 pesos divided by 4 installment and credit cash 143,750 pesos. Dito sa recognition of interest, pwede ring mag-accrue ng interest monthly kagaya sa first illustration. Ang entry ay debit interest expense and credit interest payable. Or pwede rin na ganito sa second illustration na minsanan nang ni-record ang interest kaya 3/12 yung time. Either first illustration or second illustration ang gagamitin, parehong accepted kasi pagdating sa first payment, parehas pa rin naman na 18,750 pesos ang babayaran na interest expense. Pero kung na-specify sa problem na magre-record ng monthly accrual of interest, then yung kagaya ng entry sa illustration 1 ang gagamitin. Sa pangalawang payment, mababago na yung original principal as basis of interest. Magiging 375,000 pesos na ang basis sa pangalawang payment. Dahil nakapagbayad na ng partial sa principal ng 125,000 pesos sa unang payment. Journal entry sa second payment, debit interest expense 14,062.50 pesos na nakuha sa PRT pa rin, principal times rate times time, or 375,000 pesos times 0.15 times 3/12. Debit notes payable 125,000 pesos. Yung debit notes payable na 125,000 pesos ay fixed every payment dahil based sa problem, Payable ang note ng 4 installment. Credit cash 139,062.50 cents. Sa pangatlong payment, ang magiging principal basis na sa computation of interest ay 250,000 pesos or 500,000 pesos less yung dalawang principal payment na 125,000 pesos each. Kaya ang entry sa pangatlong payment ay debit interest expense 9,375 pesos. Nakuha ang 9,375 pesos sa 250,000 pesos times 0.15 times 3/12. Another debit notes payable 125,000 pesos and credit 134,375 pesos. Journal entry sa pang-apat na payment or last payment. 125,000 pesos na lang yung principal balance kaya nakuha ang debit interest expense 4,687.50 cents sa 125,000 times 0.15 times 3/12. Then another debit yung remaining balance na 125,000 and credit cash yung total na 129,687.50 cents. Next is note payable naman na na-issue in exchange for property and interest bearing. Dalawa kasi ito pag issued for property, either interest or non-interest bearing. Illustration 3. John bought equipment amounting to 500,000 pesos payable in 4 installment dated June 2022. The note has prevailing interest of 15% and was due on June 2023. Dito sa illustration 3, parehas lang ang entry sa illustration na note issued for cash installment. Ang difference lang ay sa debit instead na cash ang ilalagay, debit property kung anong property na na-acquire and magre-record ng interest expense dito sa illustration 3. Mapapansin na parehas ang entry pati computation. Pero pagdating sa illustration 4 na note issued for property and non-interest bearing, tatlo ang method sa pag-amortize ng interest. Una, straight line method. Ginagamit ang straight line method of amortizing interest kapag lump sum ang term ng note. Or in other words, one-time payment yung note. Ang mga magiging entry ay parehas pa rin except sa amortization of interest. Yung buong discount ay i-divide sa term ng note. Andito sa illustration, 1 year ang term ng note, kaya doon nakuha ang 5,000 monthly amortization of interest. And pagdating ng maturity date, i-debit lang ang buong amount ng note na babayaran and credit cash 500,000 pesos. Next illustration ay outstanding balance method of amortization naman. Take note, itong mga methods na nadidiscuss ay applicable sa amortization of interest ng note. Ginagamit ang outstanding balance method kapag installment yung term ng note na in-issue for property. Journal entry, debit equipment, cash price equivalent 440,000, debit discount on notes payable 60,000, and credit notes payable 500,000. Sa payment naman ng principal of note, hindi na komplikado dahil i-divide lang ang 500,000 sa 4 installment and parehas lang ang entry na debit notes payable 125,000, credit cash 125,000, magmula first payment hanggang sa last payment ng installment. Sa amortization of interest kapag outstanding balance method, prorate naman ang gagawin. Ang basis ay yung outstanding balance ng note. First, ang outstanding balance ng note ay 500,000, second ay 350,000, third ay 250,000, and sa last ay 125,000. Itong mga outstanding balance ng notes payable ay magiging pro ratio ng amortization. So para makuha yung ratio or fraction ng outstanding balance mula first installment up to fourth installment, i-add lahat ng outstanding balance para makuha yung least common denominator ng mga outstanding balances. At ang total amount ay 1,250,000. Kaya doon nakuha yung fraction or rate sa first installment na 500,000 over 1,250,000 na minultiply sa discount on notes payable na 60,000. Saan nakuha yung 60,000 pesos? Nakuha yung 60,000 sa difference ng notes payable and cash price equivalent ng equipment. Dahil based sa standards, i-record ang fixed asset na equipment sa kung ano ang cash price equivalent nito regardless kung binayaran man ito ng cash or note. And since ang babayaran sa note ay yung face amount ng note, meaning yung total amount ng notes payable regardless of value in exchange sa note, then yung difference ay considered interest or yung term is discount on notes payable, meaning hindi counted sa buong notes. Hindi counted in a sense na yung value lang ng equipment ay 440,000 pero ang note payable na babayaran ay 500,000 pesos. Yung exchange of value ay hindi equal pero kahit hindi equal ang exchange value, ang babayaran pa rin sa actual ay face value ng note which is 500,000 kaya yung difference considered interest or discount on notes payable na kailangang i-amortize para pagdating ng maturity mag-i-equal yung value ng exchange, and para ma-recognize yung essence ng discount on notes payable, which is interest, dahil kahit hindi sabihin ng problem na yung difference ng cash price equivalent ng equipment at yung price ng equipment kapag na-acquire ng utang ay interest, implied na yun na yung difference ay interest dahil lahat ng utang ay may interest. I-amortize ang discount on notes payable based on outstanding balance, kaya doon nakuha yung fraction na 500,000 over 1,250,000 na minultiply sa total ng discount on notes payable na 60,000. Yun ang interest expense sa first installment, which is 24,000. Ang clue sa outstanding balance method, mapapansin na pababa yung interest expense, which is correct analogy kasi pababa naman talaga yung outstanding balance kapag installment, dahil nababawasan ang principal balance every payment. Interest expense sa second payment ay 18,000, interest expense sa pangatlong payment ay 12,000, at sa last payment ay 6,000. At ang journal entry ay parehong debit interest expense, credit discount on notes payable. Note: normally, ang discount on notes payable ay debit balance, kaya kapag nag-credit ng discount on notes payable ay deduction sa account. To check kung tama ang pag-amortize ng interest, i-add lahat ng interest expense sa first installment up to last installment payment. Dapat magtali sa total ng discount on notes payable amount. Last illustration. Note issued for property, non-interest bearing, and effective interest method naman ang gagamitin. Sa effective interest method, gagamit na ng present value factor. Ganito ang formula ng present value factor kapag lump sum. Present value of 1 equals quantity 1 plus rate raised to number of periods negative. Illustration: on January 2022, John bought equipment by signing a 500,000 non-interest bearing note due on December 2025. The market rate of the same note is 15%. The present value of 1 at 15 for 4 periods is 0.5718. Journal entry at the date of acquisition. Debit equipment kung ano yung present value ng note, 285,900 pesos na nakuha sa 500,000 times present value factor 0.5718. Itong present value factor ay rounded off 4 decimal places dahil usually up to 4 decimal places yung rounding off na ginagamit sa mga textbook sa Pilipinas. Pero pwede din naman na idiretso na lang sa calculator yung multiplication kung gustong makuha yung pinaka-exact amount ng amortization ng interest. Pero dito sa illustration ang gagamitin ay 4 decimal places. Another debit, discount to notes payable 214,100 pesos. Nakuha ang 214,100 pesos by deducting the present value cost of equipment sa face amount ng notes payable. Then credit yung buong notes payable na 500,000 pesos. Journal entry to recognize interest expense for first year, debit interest expense 42,885 pesos, and credit discount on notes payable 42,885 pesos. Nakuha ang first amortization ng interest by multiplying present value ng note or cost ng equipment, 285,900 pesos, sa market rate na 15%. Sa second amortization naman, ang computation para makuha ang interest ay carrying amount ng note sa second year times market rate. Para makuha ang second year carrying amount, i-add ang beginning balance na 285,900 pesos at first amortization of interest 42,885 pesos. Ang total nun ay 328,785 pesos. Interest expense sa second year ay 49,318 or 328,785 times 0.15. Same procedure na ang gagawin sa year 3 amortization of interest up to year 4 amortization of interest. Interest expense sa third year ay 56,715 pesos na nakuha sa 378,103 pesos times 0.15. Interest expense sa year 4 ay 65,223 pesos na nakuha sa 434,818 times 0.15. Mapapansin na yung journal entry sa last payment ay may adjustment or bawas na 41 pesos due to rounding off difference. Para sa last amortization of interest, exact amount yung mako-close sa account na discount on notes payable. Pagdating ng maturity date, December 2025, ang magiging entry kapag babayaran na yung note ay debit notes payable 500,000 pesos and credit cash 500,000 pesos.